welcome. My name is Catherine DeVita, the training coordinator at the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, and truly a pleasure to welcome all of you here today to the webinar, Laying the Foundation, the Pilot National RDM Jumpstart, where we're joined by a series of speakers who will take us through the experience of planning, piloting, and debriefing this educational experience. So before we get started, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. So as we proceed with our webinar session today, it is with the acknowledgement of the First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis Nations, and communities who have been harmed by colonial and unethical research, and of the data sovereignty and research priorities of these nations and communities. On behalf of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, we commit to understanding and taking up our role in reducing harm and advancing reconciliation in research. I'd like to personally take a moment to recognize that I'm working from the unceded territory of Tiohtià:ke, known to many as Montreal. And so this land has been the long traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka the nation, who have been the stewards of these lands and waters for generations. I'd also like to quickly review our code of conduct, which was adapted from Code for Lib. So the Alliance seeks to provide a welcoming, engaging, and safe community for everyone. Discriminatory language is not appropriate in any venue or platform. And the Alliance does not tolerate harassment in any form, and harassment can be understood as any behavior that threatens another person or group or produces the feeling of an unsafe environment. So we thank you all for your effort in keeping this webinar a safe space. So I'd like to introduce you all to today's speakers. So we're joined by the 3 graduate and PhD students who were hired to support the development and the execution of the RDM pilot. So we are joined by Maria Amoros of the University of Victoria, Huey Huang from the University of Calgary, and Erin McCoy from Carleton University. And we are also joined by 4 members of the RDM National Training Expert Group, so co-chairs Jen Abel and Nick Rockland from the University of Calgary and University of Victoria, respectively, as well as Jane Fry from Carleton and Matthew Dunbar of the University of BC in Okanagan. So Nick, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out today. And as Catherine mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Pilot National Research Data Management Jumpstart that we ran in May, which was a national boot camp workshop that we delivered to graduate students. Now, we have the full squad out here today. The graduate students, NTAG, as Catherine mentioned. I just want to highlight the graduate students whom without them, none of this could have been possible. They were absolutely amazing in developing this content, guiding it in their own practices, kind of bringing us back to reality as we might have been, wandering a little bit from our librarian-centered roles. And so just, yeah, huge thanks to the graduate students. And that introduction that you gave us, Catherine, suffice, so I will jump right into things. But before I do that, a huge shout out to the Alliance. They funded this project, made it possible. Very cool of them to do that. And so thank you very much. And so in terms of a bit of an outline to give us some structure for today, I'm going to first talk about the background, some context to why we did this program and the philosophies that we were approaching it with. We're then going to move to the applicants, who is interested in this program, who we ultimately selected to come out for the program. And then we're going to jump into the program itself, what we were teaching, how it worked, and some tweaks that we had to make on the fly. We'll follow that up by how things went, looking at participant feedback, a little bit of our own reflection, and then we're going to pass it over to the graduate students to talk about their experiences in this whole process. And then we'll wrap things up with next steps. We have left a good amount of time at the end for questions, but please feel free to fire them in the chat as they come up or wait till the end and we can give you some more qualified answers. So in terms of the background, why we did this, from the perspective of RDM, there's a lot of training in Canada for RDM, and globally, that generally consist of one-shot sessions that focus on things like DMPs, file and folder organization, documentation, metadata, and data deposits. And these are all fantastic work. They're very valuable, but they can miss some key activities and concepts that happen in research projects. And I think more importantly, they can miss the connectivity between research tools and activities that are crucial to managing data throughout a project and that are oftentimes the places where things can fall off the rails in a research project. Now, looking from another perspective, from a more technical and coding perspective, there's a lot of these workshops that are offered, but even those sessions that are kind of advertised as introductory sessions can make implicit assumptions of learners' knowledge and conceptual jumps that might not even feel like jumps to the instructor, but for those who have no computational background, no data training, they can oftentimes get lost, and feel a bit discouraged and want to quit. And that's the opposite of what we're trying to do here. We're wanting to encourage people by really meeting them where they're at. Now, in addition to this, technical workshops often focus on how a tool works and what it does, and less on how to effectively conduct research using that tool. And I think, the vast majority of people in the research ecosystem, they're not trying to be programmers, they're trying to do their research. And so putting research at the forefront is something that we really thought was important. And so, with all that said, what we decided to put together was a week-long, 20-hour workshop aimed at those that are both new to research and that have little to no computational background or data training. Now, we were really conscious about making this as open as possible, so we delivered the program online with no cost to participants. And the idea was to walk participants through the research lifecycle using an introductory data set, which in this case was the StatsCan time use survey data set, and focusing on the connections between RDM and data science. So, hitting on those things like DMPs, documentation, storage and backup, preservation and sharing. But throughout all that, weaving in concepts around coding and computational reproducibility with the ultimate goal of focusing on transparent and open research workflows. Now, to, as best we could, to build a personal experience and community-centered cohort in just the weirdness of an online environment, especially over the course of 20 hours, we limited attendance to 20 participants and prioritized graduate students. Now, in addition to delivering the program, we also built very robust and openly accessible, reusable, asynchronous training materials that were published with GitHub pages. The link is in the slides, but potentially one of my trusted colleagues could drop it in the chat if you're interested in poking around. And these materials were not only used in the delivery, but people who were taking the live session could look at them afterwards, and it can be used in perpetuity to, teach the same program or as a foundation upon which we can build. So moving forward to some numbers, we had 175 total applicants, which shocked me. I didn't think it was going to be this high, so it was great to see. These yellow bars represent students and postdocs, so a good amount of master's, PhD students, lesser amount of postdocs, but that's just kind of a numbers game. We also have faculty, librarians, and you can see that this other category is very large. It was a lot of research staff who were listing their particular positions, and you give people a free text option, sometimes they'll just go off. And then we also had one undergraduate student as well. And it's also worth noting that because we were prioritizing graduate students, we mentioned this in the application, there were a number of librarians who reached to us directly via email that aren't captured in these numbers. And so as part of the application, we asked applicants to assess themselves. And on this top row in the yellow bars, this was kind of experience with RDMs. So we have experience with data repositories, DMPs, and data documentation. And you can see that the vast majority of people had never used a repository, never written a DMP. A good amount of people had never created data documentation, but lesser so than the other two categories. Moving down to experience with R and Python, wanting to get a sense of people's coding experience. There were a number of people that had no experience with either R or Python, but you can see that there's varying experiences with how these technologies have worked. But One of the really interesting takeaways we saw from this was that those who had experience with coding had no experience with RDM, which kind of strengthened our approach to marrying these two ideas. Now, in terms of the selection process of the 175 total applicants, we had 88 students, undergrad, graduate, and postdocs that were selected for a detailed review. And the criteria was based on a combination of RDM and coding skills that you just saw, in which lower skills were regarded more favorably because this was meant to be a very introductory session, as well as a letter of intent of up to 300 words describing what people were hoping to get from the program and how it connected to their research. Now, of those 88, we whittled it down to 30 students. I believe we had 10 masters, 17 PhD, two postdocs, and one graduate student who was going into a master's program. Now, you can see that we had a pretty good range of fields of studies, natural sciences being the foremost, but a pretty good spread of not just one discipline. Now, in terms of how the students selected themselves, you can see that these patterns pretty closely reflect the overall cohort. And noting that we did allow certain people who had experience with coding into this program because they were really interested in the RDM aspect, and in that letter of intent built the case for why they wanted to take this program. And so with all of that said, I'm going to pass it over to Jen to talk about what it is we taught.
Yeah, so what did we actually do in this program? Well, and I'll start off by talking about what we actually plan to do in the program. So day one, we started off with a fairly lecture-heavy session because we wanted to get people grounded in thinking about RDM and how it connected to research and to coding, etc. So day one was what is RDM and why is it important? An overview of the data science workflow and of the tools we were going to use during the week, an introduction to the Open Science Framework Platform, or OSF, which is where we were making materials available to share and also encouraging students to use that as a backup for their materials during the week. Then we got into data management planning in a fair amount of detail, both why we do it and tools that you can use to do it, and how that would help us prepare for the week. Day two, we moved into bias and reproducibility in research, as both of these things are things we try to eliminate or mitigate through good data management practices. Moving from platforms like Excel into R and why you would make that change. And then the biggest chunk of the second half of the day was doing an introduction to R and looking at some first steps. And this is just a quick overview of the program. If you'd like to see it in more detail, again, the website has all of the materials that you can look at because we made them available asynchronously as well. Now, at the end of day two, things got a bit interesting because we realized by the end of the introduction and first steps in our session that not everyone had the same level of foundational computing skills or understanding that we had maybe expected they would have, despite being newbies in R, which meant that we weren't going to be able to cover everything with everyone at the same time, at the same speed. We had a lot of people going off into breakout rooms with our helpers. And again, many, many thanks to all of our technical helpers through the week, without whom we could not have done this program. And then they would come back into the main room and they would be not where we wanted them to be, not where they wanted to be. So between day two and day three, we decided we needed to pivot. So let's go to the next slide, please, Nick. So day three, our original plan was that we would start off with looking at dependencies and reproducible research environments. And we decided, no, that was not going to be how we were going to go forward. What we started doing on day three was have multiple streams for people needing different speeds of presentation of the material or even different material. So we started with, on day 3, with a review of what we had done the day before. And then we moved into these streams where we had some people doing the new material at the regular speed, some people doing the new material at a slower speed, and then some people who were already familiar with those ideas doing the material, doing more advanced material. So we had 3 different streams. We had 3 different rooms where this was happening. We had multiple instructors. We had multiple helpers in helper rooms. And we had Jane and I in the background trying to manage traffic control. And it worked. So we were able to go through the rest of our material in various forms with everyone. So day 3, some people did get the dependencies and reproducible research environments. And everyone got, at some speed, data structures and data types in R, and data filtering and selecting techniques. Day 4, again, data visualization and exploration we had in streams, as well as some parts at the beginning where we were talking about the general ideas. That was as a group. We had a really great session on troubleshooting errors in R, which was small groups, again, all together, so that everybody could work on those, and then saving and organizing outputs. And then day 5, we all came back together again. We did an overview of sharing and depositing data, why you do it, what you need to take into consideration. We looked at depositing data into Borealis. If there's anyone here from Borealis, we didn't deposit into the main repository. We did it into the demo site, so it's all good. And then we had a facilitated breakout group session for our attendees to discuss how the program went. Because this was a pilot, we wanted to get their feedback and get that in small groups with people who were not the instructors. So again, thanks to the folks who came and facilitated those breakout sessions for us and were our note takers. That was extremely helpful as well. So how did it go after all of this? Well, if you look at our attendance, it went really well. Normally with free events like this, you expect maybe half of the people to show up. We had expected 26 people to start the week. One person, we don't know what happened to them. So we had 25 people attend at some point on the same day. So that's what our numbers are reflecting here. And we had between 68% and 96% attendance during the course of the week. The average attendance was 85%. And most of the people who weren't able to attend during a particular session did let us know. They said, hey, I have to go and do this other thing. I have to go and do this other event. Can I catch up on the material other ways? So attendance was way beyond what we expected. When we also did a quick survey, not that quick of a survey, a fairly reasonable survey after the end of the program. Next slide, please, Nick. And we got 16 responses to our survey, which is not bad, again, for a not required survey in a free event. We asked people to rate their satisfaction with the program, and almost everybody said they were either extremely satisfied or somewhat satisfied, which made us very happy. There were a couple of people who were somewhat dissatisfied. We're not sure who those were, which is good. We don't want to know. We did have some people who came to the program who were looking for help with more qualitative research, which we weren't as focused on. We were looking more at quantitative methods. So they might not have gotten quite what they were looking for, but they stayed the whole time. So they were still getting some of what they were looking for. We asked them as well about how likely they were to connect what they'd learned to their research activities. And again, very positive responses. Most people were either extremely likely to connect it or somewhat likely to connect it. We also asked them whether they would recommend this to other people if it was offered again. Most people, again, extremely likely or somewhat likely. There were a few who weren't sure. We understand. It was a pilot. There are things we'd like to try differently for next time. We did actually have people who would like to come back and try it again if we do it again, because they found it was useful and would like to be reinforced on the material. We had some text boxes in the survey as well. got participant feedback in different areas. So some of the feedback we got on the teaching was that the team did an excellent job of dynamically changing the programming to suit the various levels of comfort with R. I was able to find sessions that matched my skill and comfort easily. Great. We asked about the asynchronous materials. Folks said that these guides were incredibly clear and helpful for when I missed something during the sessions. It also helped to take a cursory look over what we were going to be doing, which made it much easier to follow along, which was great. On the online delivery, we weren't sure how people would feel about online versus in person, but people seemed to like it. This particular person said, I found the virtual delivery to work well. It brought together so many people from across Canada. And speaking for myself as a precariously employed grad student, I probably would not have been able to participate if the program was held in person, primarily due to higher costs of travel. And then on impact, we had one of our participants say, I'm going to disseminate what I've learned in this workshop to the rest of my research group in terms of good RDM practices and using data repositories. So that was hugely inspiring to us. That's exactly what we were hoping for, that it wouldn't just be these people getting it for themselves, but sharing it with others. And then a final participant thought on impact. And I have to say, this was not prompted in any way. This was spontaneous. Someone suggested that workshops for data management are desperately and highly desirable. More funding and resources are needing to build this program out. So just putting that in there for anyone in the room who might be in a place to think about those funding and resources. It's really important to note from our end, though, and hopefully from your end as well, that the impact was not just on the student learners. This program had a lot of impact on our research assistants as well, and we're going to get them to tell you about what it was like for them in the next little bit.
Hello. So I am Erin. I'm one of the research assistants on this project. So the RAs, now you're going to hear from each of us, are going to talk a little bit about what we did and what we experienced, what we learned during this project. So I am a fourth year PhD student about to graduate at Carleton University. Maria is a third year PhD student at Victoria, and Hui is a second year master's student at Calgary. So we're all at different points in our education, and we're also all in different fields. So I'm in social psychology, Maria is in educational psychology, and Hui is in neuroscience. So it was a nice collaboration among a lot of different career points and also fields. So just sort of what we did generally, we developed this curriculum starting in January through April, and then we helped teach the workshop in May. We had weekly RA meetings, just the three of us, to touch base, as well as full team meetings every other week with the librarians also. Throughout, we communicated using Slack, and we collaborated on curriculum using Google Drive and GitHub. So all of this together helped us have a really collaborative and welcoming team environment. We felt that our perspectives were really valued and a lot of our ideas became incorporated into this final product. We also received a lot of feedback throughout, which helped us learn both from each other and from the librarians. So we're going to hear about a few different areas where we felt like we developed skills from each of us. So I'm going to pass it off to Maria, I think, next.
Yes, Maria. Thank you, Erin. So I am Maria. Nice to meet you all. And I'll be talking about one of the main things we got out from this workshop, and it's that we feel we developed some research data management skills. We learned how research data management looks like when working as collaborating with a team. We had knowledge of some of the content we were helping develop and deliver, but not all. So I think each of us learned something along the way. And we learned by getting in contact with theory or by reviewing the content for the workshop. We also applied a lot of these principles while developing the materials and activities for the workshop. And we got to engage in good practices for file organization, version tracking, to mention some. We also now understand like how and why having clear documentation supports reproducible research. It not only helps us keep track of our own work, but also helps our team members, collaborators, students, or external researchers be able to understand what's going on and to verify or build on our research, and it makes it more fair. We also recognize the value of creating strong data management plan. It is not just paperwork, and it is part of the documentation, but it adds value of keeping track what you plan to do, and it evolves like while the process is going. So you document like what happened and why it happened to keep track of that and for it to be useful in the future. This experience built on our existed knowledge, and all of us learned something new, as I said, but whether it was discovering a new tool or a fresh perspective, we each improved our data management skills, and we are now committed to apply these good practices in our own research and encourage others to do the same. And I'll pass it on to Hui.
So my name is Hui, and I'm RA of the workshops, and we did learn a lot of things through working through the projects. But I think the more of the thing that we learned is that we learned about R programmings, and before the workshop, with most of us, we are just using R for simple data analysis, like running basic functions, making a few plots or continuous numbers. But we didn't understand what happened under the hood or how the functions. But after the workshop, as we learned and we gain deeper understanding of the R concepts and key packages through teaching a lot of students. And now we're quite confident enough not only to write kind of our own functions and but also teach others and really confident and build a reproducible research workflows. Next is our Markdown. In the past, just kind of we tend to keep our codes and our outputs and our write-up in separate places. For instance, one file result passed into Word document, for example, and notes scattered around. But learning our Markdown, we learned how to integrate code analysis and narrative in a single document, and this gives us the confidence to produce kind of polished and reproducible reporting documentations. And as you can see on the website, that's a kind of result of the R Markdown. Finally, Git and GitHub, we in the past probably we moderately working alone and we don't know how to collaborate in the coding projects, and collaborating is quite confusing for us. Usually we tend to email scripts and back and forth and override each other work, and oftentimes we lose tracks of who changed that and now we understand more in terms of the collaborative working flows and how to commit code, managing friends and resolve more conflicts. We also have some hands-on experience with version control and sharing projects online. And I think both of us agree that these are really an essential skill for any data-driven career, not just in terms of research, but also industry as well. And so we found it extremely helpful. Yeah, so I'm gonna pass now into Erin, right? Or Maria, right? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Maria. We also gained a lot of teaching skills through this program. I am from educational psychology, so I was able to identify a lot of those. For some of us, it was the first time teaching. For others, it was the first time teaching online. Or for me, it was the first time teaching to a large audience in English. English is not my first language. By participating in the creation of the workshop, we improved skills in curriculum design, resource creation, making sure every piece of content was relevant and made sense in the sequence, but also that the amount of time we would dedicate to each section was the appropriate amount. And by developing activities and strategies, we got really a lot of hands-on experience in what happens before, in the planning of a workshop, but also what happens during delivery of a workshop. And when we realized what Jane explained earlier, that not every one of the participants had the same level of foundational computational skills, we were able to adapt and change things that were not working as planned. And that became a really good learning experience from the perspective of teaching skills. I liked how we were able to be aware of the situation and make decisions and adapt by repeating some of the content that some of the students were in need of repetition, by having a team of helpers that were taking students to the breakout rooms to explain things more in detail, or by splitting the groups by skill level so that one group could take things at a slower pace while others could learn some new skills. We had to be open to the idea of changing the plan, and that is a good skill to have. By the end of the workshop, we also learned good practices to evaluate and refine workshops based on feedback. That's something that, through my experiences, doesn't happen all the time, but really in here, I really liked how an external group were there to gather the feedback from students. And then we got a meeting where we were able to talk about that feedback and also our own takeaways from the experience and brainstorm how this type of workshop could improve in the future.
So the last area of sort of skill development we wanted to talk about was sort of general professional development skills. So I took this section because I think, the closest to sort of graduating, so leaving graduate school and entering the more normal workplace. And I applied to this position because I wanted some more work experience that was sort of outside the sort of just working on your thesis alone, sort of isolated research. And I think this position really did actually achieve that. So a few different sort of specific skills we wanted to talk about were project management. So we had this very clear long-term end goal of the workshop happening, but we also had a lot of short-term deadlines to meet in the meantime. It was really exciting to have a project laid out with some clear goals to accomplish, but there was also a lot of leeway for us adding in our own ideas throughout the process. We also had to produce sort of a high quality product at the end of it that was available to the public. So I think that was sort of a good goal to have, and also is sort of a useful thing to show sort of for future jobs that I also can produce something other than just a research thesis on a really niche topic. So I'm glad that product exists, and I also will refer back to it often when I need some of this in my own research these days. All the resources online that are available. We also did a lot of independent problem solving. So there's a lot of the RAs troubleshooting things as our individual selves, also among the RAs as our own little group. And I think it was generally useful to practice troubleshooting technical issues by ourselves and feeling capable of doing that. But there's also a lot of additional support available from the librarians when we needed it. So we got practice making that judgment call of when can you figure something out by yourself and when can you ask for extra support. As we've talked about throughout, this was also a collaborative team. So we worked both as an RA team, as peers, and also with the librarians who obviously have more expertise. Our perspectives always felt really valued, and we got the opportunity to learn from people who know more about all of these different topics. We also got the opportunity to learn from people in other fields that do data science. So learning across different areas that approach data science differently was really useful. So we were learning from each other as RAs, from the librarians, and also from the students in the workshop. It was neat to see how other people are applying these skills in their own research in completely different fields. Yes, so overall, we also practiced a lot with sort of collaborative team communication, task delegation, and all of the also giving each other kind of thoughtful feedback throughout the process. We also got a lot of practice working with people in a lot of different locations and collaborating from multiple disciplines, multiple time zones, all virtually. So I think this is how a lot of work is conducted these days. And it was great to get that experience, having a really functional and collaborative team virtually. As a social psychologist, I've always been a little skeptical of sort of virtual work, but this helped swayed me a little bit. So I think having this experience of a really functional virtual collaboration will be useful sort of in my future career as a model for how this can happen effectively. Last, as I sort of hinted along the way, it was really nice to just have that experience outside of the graduate student research workplace. So grad school teaches us a lot of useful skills, but it's a very unique and often really siloed and isolating type of workplace. So this felt much more, I think, what I hope to find kind of an industry in the future as far as a workplace setting, and working on with other people, sort of having coworkers has been really fun. And so I'm going to kind of miss our weekly check-ins. Yeah, so I had enjoyed working with everyone together on this. And yeah, on to Hui.
Yeah, so let's talk about what we hope for the futures. I think first about early access, and we all agree that we wish to have this training earlier in our graduate studies, ideally in our first years, because learning these tunes sooner, I think, what's going to be make us much more research and more efficient and reproducible in the day one. We just feel like we should waste way too much time. Second, about increased access. The demands are really high. At this time, we have, as Jens already mentioned, Nick already mentioned, we have around 175 applicants, but only can admit 30 students. So we're hoping that we can scale up the workshop so that more students can benefit. And we are thinking of a way to offer it regularly, like whether it's 1 year or 8 terms, to meet this growing interest. So in terms of content delivery, as we think about expanding the workshop, well, we're asking, how can we deliver this content effectively to a larger group of students? Some ideas may include a hybrid format that combining online and in-person sections, peer-led breakout group, and maybe can have a modular self-paced material that students can access on their own schedule. Finally, when we first mentioned about the workshop to our classmates, the response was overwhelmingly positive. There's strong appetite for practicals and collaborative learning like this. So I think that feedback gives a really confidence to really scale it up that to be both possible and valuable for student. So right now, I will hand things over back to Jens and Nate to talk about next step.
All right. And the RAs have actually covered a lot of the next steps that we would like to get into. Great minds, right? Yes, we do want to establish the Jumpstart as a regular offering, whether that becomes an annual thing or a per term thing. We don't know, but that's something we want to plan out for the future. We also want to look at additional audiences. We did keep it relatively narrow for this first iteration, but we know there's a lot of interest from different groups, like librarians, like staff members supporting RDM. We're also thinking about possibly discipline-based workshops. As we said, there's differences between RDM and computational methods for quantitative research versus qualitative research. Possibly different methods of delivery, whether something in hybrid, whether something in person, something like that. Because the initial program is meant to be foundational, we also want to investigate the possibility of building subsequent programs that would use the learning objectives from this program as prerequisites, so that eventually we could form an educational trajectory where people can start with the foundation and move up to more advanced level concepts, with research always positioned as the primary focus. And then maybe it can ladder into things like the more advanced research computing sessions or other more advanced work that people might be doing. A really important thing, though, is that we need to secure resourcing to do all of these things. Having the RAs was really key to this project happening. If it had just been NTAG, it would have been probably not possible to do, both from a person power standpoint and also a perspective standpoint. All of us librarians are a bit further away from grad school, to varying degrees. So we are all at a bit of a remove from what people are concerned with during those years of their educational career. So having the RA people power and perspective was key. But also we noted that this program was freely offered to the participants. But freely offered does not mean without cost. So we did get alliance funding for the RAs, without which we could not have done the program. But even then, if you look at the hours that NTAG put in and that our helpers put in and that our feedback session support put in, we're looking at thousands of volunteer hours from the Canadian RDM community, which is great, but not sustainable when you're doing it off the side of the desk, or even as a half or more of your desk, depending on the day. So those are the things we need to think about in the future, and that we need to think about in collaboration with the Alliance and possibly with other partners in the future. But with that, assuming I haven't missed anything that Nick or anybody else would like to say, we can move on to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, all of you. Jen, Nick, for your presentation. To the RAs, thank you so much. So I just want to spotlight a question that was answered in the chat earlier in case anyone missed it. So the question was, how many people in total, planners, instructors, helpers, traffic control, etc., were involved, trying to get an idea of the ratio of students to teachers. So Jane replied in chat that there were about 20 involved in the planning and execution. Maybe a follow-up question here of interest: if this is to be scaled up, do you foresee the need of that support to increase kind of proportionately with the audience of the Jumpstart, or is 20 appropriate depending on how high you end up scaling this?
Someone asked me this, I think it must have been at DRI Connect. And it's a really interesting question. I think one of the needs for or maybe anyway, it was at something I did in the last month. Because yeah, having like a one-to-one student to teacher ratio is not really sustainable if we hope to scale this up. If we want to have 50 students, we can't have 50 instructors and helpers. One of the reasons we really, so from context, we didn't have all of the helpers in every session. We had enough helpers. We planned to have 2 or 3 helpers in every session that we had, every hands-on session, for those breakout rooms, for those help rooms that people could go into. The challenge came when we had to do the pivot to the multiple streams, where we had all of the instructors involved, all of the RAs involved, all of the helpers involved, and the extra people doing traffic control in the back end. At that point, it was an absolutely all hands on deck of whoever was there. And that at that time, it was not 20 people in the room. It was more like 7 instructors and RAs plus 3 to 4 helpers. So we were looking at 10 or 11. Again, that's still a very high student to teacher ratio. So thinking about how the program would be structured in such a way that either we planned for the streams or that we didn't have the need for the streams would affect that the number of instructors and helpers required. But if we, yeah, I mean, if we hadn't had the people we had there, we would not have been able to do it as we did, but it's not a sustainable model. So yes, it will not happen in exactly this way again. But there'll always be enough people to make sure that the people who are in the program are supported. We don't ever want to get into a situation where someone leaves halfway through because they can't get their questions answered. I hope that gives some more insight into the question, into the challenge that we had in this particular instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, there's a question about scaling it down, 10 to 15 people. So I think the content would need to be restructured. That, it went very well, but this was a pilot. And I think that a lot of the pandemonium that happened when we went to the technical things could help with the restructuring, but 20 hours in 1 week was nuts. I would guide you not to do that. Spread it out a little bit more, spread the teaching out a bit more, give people time to stew on it on their own, because that can really loosen up the resourcing necessary to have these multiple streams and everything. There's creative ways that you could do that, but I would recommend, and I think, this goes back to the resourcing question, but restructuring the content in different ways and creative ways to foresee where people might fall off the rails. We learn that, but also to accommodate a bit looser schedules and for some more discovery that doesn't require that hands-on approach.
Yeah, really appreciate that. And Marjorie, I'll just say, I think the question was probably answered, your follow-up question here about divvying up the course into different streams. So I will leave that there for now, just in the interest of time, and that we do have several other questions to get to. But I'll invite all of you speakers, if you'd like to add some more thoughts, you can also type your answers into the Q&A. And you can also take this into the chat as well. So we have another question from Caroline. So what made you decide to use R instead of Python for the pilot project?
There were a couple of reasons. I think first and foremost, we were trying to avoid hiccups related to like installation and initial setup. And in our experience, getting R installed and having a single kind of like common IDE, RStudio that everybody uses really kind of would simplify that initial process. And that in part is because we also wanted to give the students the experience of actually running this on their own machine locally, as opposed to working in a cloud-based environment, which would make that simpler in Python if we went that route. I think the other reason that we chose R instead of Python is because in our minds, the kinds of disciplines that we had in mind were those who were not already using computational tools. And even though Python is used for data analysis, first and foremost, it is like a true coding language for application development. And so it attracts a very different audience in many respects than I think what we were targeting this particular session for. So those were the primary guiding reasons. I think as this connects maybe back to Marjorie's question as well, is that one of the things that we had talked about early on is if we did this in terms of like, if we got more advanced with this and we started to introduce more advanced concepts in the context of research data management, would we then actually start to use a different set of languages? So we tried to keep it simple with OSF and with R. We had talked about if we were able to do this again as a more intermediate, maybe moving to like introducing GitHub and Git alongside Python. And then if the world is your oyster, could you start to do this with something like Julia as well? So you end up with this really kind of scaffolded approach that gets people into a deeper core understanding of the computational environment that they're working in conjunction with learning really good RDM practices alongside them.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for that well thought out, very reflective answer. Appreciate it. Okay, so moving right along here, we have a comment from Joe, but I think it's really interesting. So realizing that this can get quite complicated in terms of the like operational side of this, but the demand might be so great that it would be useful to approach this as a train the trainers kind of program, an opportunity to take this back to one's own community or institution. And so realizing that this isn't necessarily a question per se, but something that could bring up an interesting discussion, and curious if any of you have had similar thoughts.
Yes, is the short answer. We recognize that, I mean, part of the reason for creating the asynchronous materials is so that they can be used by other people, whether that's a student learning on their own or someone else wanting to teach the material. We were actually quite surprised at the number of applications we got from people who wanted to do this as a train the trainer program. And that may have been a bit of a factor of the audiences we were sharing the information with. Dissemination of information about training programs like this is still a bit of a bit challenging. We're still trying to figure out how to make that work. But yes, we do recognize that there is that need for enabling people to make this something that can be local at their institutions, which then might also reduce the need for as many people in an online program. There will still be people who would want to do it that way, but if people can do it in person at an institution, we'd be quite happy to work with them to develop the skills to do that. So I think the short answer is yes, we have thought about that. Whether that will be our next step going forward, we're not sure, but it is something we're thinking about.
Thank you so much. So question here, any plans to include experienced researchers as co-trainers to integrate the perspectives and expertise of actually doing RDM at the front line? It isn't nearly as pretty as RDM training suggests.
No, it's not. One thing we had originally thought about for the last day was having a panel session with researchers to talk about their experiences of RDM and reproducible research and things like that. Just because of the amount of time we had, we wound up not integrating that because we did schedule it to end the Friday before a long weekend. So we knew we were going to lose people anyway. And we thought rather than overwhelming people, it would probably be better to give them a kinder exit and and make sure we got that feedback session. So we didn't have that panel. But yes, it's certainly something that would be interesting to do in the future. Again, recognizing that having researchers in, not just as people who can, be on a panel and speak to their experience, but also be involved in the development. There is a big time commitment involved. So we need people who are able to commit to that time commitment, who's, I'm thinking about my workload letter coming out in a couple of weeks, who are able to, build that into their service component or whatever. But yes, I think that would be another great perspective to have if we can make it work.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Okay, last question here so far in the Q&A. And so based on what was discussed today and in the curriculum, there may have been the impression that there was a lot of focus on R specifically as opposed to RDM. So how were RDM issues such as team collaboration, data management, metadata maintenance, role of RA research librarians, et cetera, addressed as part of RDM protocols or DMPs prior to publication to Borealis, for example?
That was day one. Day one was RDM. Day one was why we're doing this. And then coming back to it on day 5 in terms of Borealis reinforcing, and if you are going to deposit anything, you need to have done all of these things before you get there, and you need to consider all of these things. Was it the ideal balance? Probably. again, in a week, there was only so much we could do. And there would probably be places where we might tweak that balance a little more, try to build the through line, etc. But it was, yeah, it's a work in progress. This was the pilot, and I think we've learned that there are ways we can reinforce the less computational bits of RDM throughout the course of the week. But at the same time, I think everybody left with an understanding of the amount of thinking that needs to go into it beyond just, I've got my CSV that I'm going to import into R and make some pretty pictures with.
I think
Anyone else? Yeah.
I think it's fair to say as well that we cut a lot of content. We had
Yes.
way more content than what we delivered. And the question that we always came back to is, what is the core foundation that individuals need to be able to do as they step away from a graphical user interface and start to use a tool that supports really good research data management and really kind of provenance tracking as one works with their data, and using that tool to produce a lot of those other things like data management plans, like data dictionaries, that make for a really good RDM environment. And in that process, we kept having to check. So is what we're looking at, is this at this stage of somebody who's coming to this brand new with no experience in all those contexts of RDM that we highlighted in the earlier graphs, as well as no experience in the tool that we wanted to use in order to be able to do this? Is what we're looking at, is it a nice to know, or is it a need to know to get those core foundational skills? Because this was really about enabling people to be able to start their learning journey and then build on that with those other pieces. Not that they're not invaluable, but you have to start somewhere.
So I don't see any more questions coming into the Q&A. A few comments saying thank you to all of you in the chat that are coming in. So congratulations. So we'll wrap it up here. Again, thank you so much to our panelists for joining, to the members of NTAG, and to the RAs for this really successful pilot. Truly cannot say congratulations loud enough. Thank you very much to our two interpreters who made it possible to offer this session both in English and French. Very much appreciated. And thank you to all of you who joined us here today and share the interest in this pilot and are now invested in seeing what's next. And so here we are sitting at the edge of our seat and can't wait to see where this pilot leads. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Wishing everyone a great afternoon. And until next time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Merci.